afternoon, everybody. Sorry for our little bit of technical difficulties getting it all set. My chair has been removed and I now have a throne. My name is Liz Willen. I am the moderator and the editor-in-chief of the Hechinger Report, a nonprofit news outlet. I hope you'll all sign up for our newsletters. They're free. And I'm really excited to be here back in person. I've been coming to South by Southwest EDU for many years, and I'm so excited to be with this panel, especially because they're going to be talking about issues that we're completely and utterly obsessed with at the Hechinger Report, and that is the different ways of getting a higher education degree, credential. There's a lot of different names for it these days. Different ways that we get there, how we get there, and what we as a society can do to make sure that pathways that are set up are more equitable and help students who might not feel college is always the right choice. There's lots of ways to get there. We're going to be talking about what those options are, and we are having a big reveal today, I hear. You're going to hear some new research that has never been spoken of before publicly. And I'm going to have our terrific panel introduce themselves, and we're going to get right to the research. We're going to have a little time for questioning, we hope, but if not, we're all going to be invited back to the Hilton tomorrow morning from 11 to 12 in room 412 at the 4th floor, where a lot of us will be around to answer questions and be available to talk more about the research. So I'm going to start with my right and have the panelists introduce themselves, and we're going to get right into the research.
Hi, everybody. My name is Maria Flynn, and I'm the president and CEO of Jobs for the Future. We are a national nonprofit organization that works to drive economic advancement for all. It's my first time at South by Southwest EDU, so I'm excited to be here.
Hello, everybody. I'm Jean Eddy. I'm president and CEO of American Student Assistance. We are a nonprofit based in Boston, and our mission, and I would say our big focus, is helping kids as early as middle school know themselves, know their options, and make informed choices to achieve their education and career goals. Really nice to be here.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Roberto Rodriguez. I'm Assistant Secretary for Policy and Planning at the U.S. Department of Education, and it's a real pleasure to be part of today's panel. I want to thank ASA and Jobs for the Future for their leadership and for inviting me to be part of today's discussion.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rahul Choudaha, Managing Director at Morning Consult. We are a global data and intelligence company based out of Washington, D.C., about 500 people. And I especially head the higher education and post-secondary education related research.
And you are going to walk us through this data that no one has seen before, correct?
I have also not seen it. All right, so should we go ahead?
Let's go ahead. I understand you're going to stand when you do this. Okay. We will not even interrupt you with questions. We'll let you just go for it.
Perfect. All right, so hello, everyone. So what I'm going to present to you is really a path-breaking research on pathways to different alternatives beyond high school. And it was a true pleasure to partner with ASA and JFF for this research. And I truly highlight the partnership because we spent a lot of time and energy in figuring out what the big problem is and what are the potential pathways and solutions to it based on data. And that's where the foundation of the research is. And as a true researcher, I can warn you that I have done 3 things. Added a lot of slides, a lot of text, and I'm going to speak very fast. So it's on you if you can keep up with me or not. In all seriousness, there are 3 big messages we'll be talking about. First is, let's see, where's the slide?
There we go.
There you go. So the first thing is that employers and Gen Z high school students are willing to consider pathways. So I'm sharing the highlights of the report up front with you. We'll dig more into the deep data. And also a reminder that this is a preview to the report which will be coming up in a few weeks' time. So you are getting an early reveal of the data. The second big point is that the lack of awareness and the perception of risk, and it's in the quotes, because the risk can mean different things to different people. It could be completely misplaced risk perception also, but it exists to some people. And that could be a potential barrier for pursuing alternative pathways. And finally, how do we overcome this challenge? And that's a part of potentially bridging the information gap or the perception gap which both Gen Z and employers may be having related to these alternative pathways. So that's a big finding. And in terms of data, we really wanted to make it comprehensive, rigorous, and convincing enough so that our stakeholders in the field can rely on the data to make the big decisions they need to make. We looked at the qualitative side, we looked at the quantitative side, we looked at the Gen Z high school students, 14 to 19-year-olds, and we looked at the employers, director plus title, 600 of them, to understand the 360-degree view of this important topic. Now, one definition aspect I can share, pathways can be used multiple ways in multiple contexts. What we are doing here is to understand the pathways for those high school students, college or beyond. But our focus here is non-degree pathways. That's what we are looking at and trying to investigate the perception and awareness and challenges to it. Okay, let's see. There you go. So this is the first finding. Employers and high school students are in search of skills. Some of you may have been into those sessions related to skill-based hiring, the importance of it, need of it, and the trend towards the higher employer demand towards skill-based hiring. In our data also, we noticed that 4 out of 5 employers are clearly saying that organizations should hire based on skills and not credentials, and here more specifically degrees. We go to the Gen Z side, a similar sentiment, perception. 3 out of 4 Gen Z high school students say, I want to learn the skills which can help me prepare for the jobs for the future. They are oriented towards it, they are looking to it, that okay, what can give them the best pathway for success? Majority of high school students and employers agree that organizations should hire candidates from non-degree pathways. Now, we all know, we have seen it, we have heard it, and many of us have experienced it with our family member about some of the challenges and concerns and curiosities about what college education can present to them. And that's what, to some extent, we see in this data, that 2 out of 3 employers are saying organizations should proactively hire candidates from non-degree pathways. So there is openness, clearly, on the employer side to consider candidates from non-degree pathways. On the Gen Z side also, almost 60% are saying companies should hire more candidates, high school graduates, who have pursued non-degree education pathways. So again, this is the 2 sides of the coin. Again, we see that there is openness, there is consideration for pathways beyond what we know as college degree as a sole pathway. So what we are seeing here, diverse pathways for a diverse audience in one way. But there is a level of perception of risk. It could be unfounded, it could be unreasonable, it could be completely out of proportion. However, there is that perception of risk about what are the implications for taking a pathway which is non-college pathway. So 54% of the employers, just over half of them, indicated that it is less risky to hire someone with a college degree. 2 out of 3 Gen Z high school students say that I'm worried about choosing wrong pathway. Now, that perception of wrong is a very important one, that who is shaping that wrong pathway, how it is getting formed, and is it truly the wrong pathway? So there are multiple questions which can be emerging out of this perception of what is risk and why it is being formed and who is shaping it. There is also another gap we see in terms of non-college pathways, and that is related to information gaps. So most of the respondents indicated that they are seeing this information gap to understand non-degree pathways more holistically. We know that the complete landscape of options beyond college have really expanded in last few years. So multiple credentials, multiple forms, multiple definitions and glossaries which are available for both the employer side and on the Gen Z side. So to make the sense of that is also an important element. And what we notice here is 4 out of 5 employers indicating that organizations need more information. You go to the Gen Z side, 3 out of 4 of them are indicating that high schools should do more to help them understand that college may not be the sole path for them. They may still be successful by taking an alternative pathway which could be a better fit for what they want and how they want to achieve it. One of the key points also I'll highlight here is not just the information gap, and potentially it will emerge in the discussion, is the timing of that information. The sooner the high school students can get access to this kind of information, maybe the outcomes will be even better. So, this is the slide which I call as a free eye exam slide. So if a lot of text in a lot of numbers, and my job here is to just highlight 2 most important things. These slides will be available to you. What we have done is, on one side, vertically, we are comparing different education pathways. Think of it as certificate, certification. Go further down, we are talking about even early college and boot camps. And on the other side, we are trying to measure across between employer, so employer is in blue, and in teal color is the Gen Z high school student. What are we measuring here? We are looking at the willingness to hire on the employer side and willingness to pursue a particular credential on the Gen Z side. One way to interpret that slide right there is how does the willingness to pursue these credentials differ by Gen Z and high school students? And what we notice that, of course, there is a gap. Right at the top is license, the first option. As an example, registered nurse. 63% of the employers are willing to hire someone with that particular credential, a license. On the Gen Z side, 1 out of 3 is willing to consider that path, pursue that path. An implication, this information gap potentially needs to be bridged. How would a Gen Z high school student pursue a path or get excited about pursuing a path unless they don't know what potential and promise may exist for them going ahead in terms of career and employability? Remember the first slide we talked about, they're looking for skills which can provide them the pathways for employability in future. So that's one gap to be looked at. The other way to think of is the likelihood. So another question we asked in addition to willingness is the likelihood. They may say that I'm willing to do it, but would they actually do it? How likely it is to act upon it? And there is a gap. There is more willingness, less likelihood. And somewhere this perception of risk and information gap may also be posing some challenge. So what we notice is, just as an example, 33% of Gen Z high school students were willing to pursue a license, but only 33% were willing to pursue a license, but 24% are likely to do it. That's a gap. So how do we overcome that kind of risk perception or information gap which they may be having? And I'll just close it out with this one last slide. And this is, we captured as a comprehensive survey, but we also added a few open-ended questions in that. And what I'm just sharing is the 2 sides from employers and Gen Z, a couple of open-ended comments, that what would you make to consider the non-degree post-secondary education pathway candidates to hire? One example is, if we could effectively evaluate, how do we assess the skills? How the candidates can demonstrate the skills? If you go on the Gen Z side, the thing is about, again, give me the evidence, an example of how they can get an example from an employer about the potential of getting hired from a particular pathway. So that demonstration of opportunities. But with that, I will close it out with the three major points which we started with. Just as a quick reference point, willingness to consider is there. So it could be a myth that no, the employers and Gen Z are not open to consider alternative pathway. They are open. However, there are some challenges in the way. And it is a challenge, call to action for all of us here, potentially, and we will be getting into more in the panel discussion, that how do we overcome some of those challenges. With that, I want to share this QR code. The report will be available, the slides for you to download and access, and the more will be coming up in a few weeks' time, so look up for our website on ASA and JFF. Thank you.
That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Oh, I have so many questions. That's the problem with being a journalist. I have so many questions, and yet it's not my turn to ask them. It's my turn to ask the panelists to ask questions. So I'm going to start with Maria because you're so tuned into the employer side. And there's so many trends here, too, that we've been seeing. Higher student debt, lower college enrollment, community college enrollment particularly on decline, a lot of debt for the for-profit schools that are offering different alternatives to students. So when I'm thinking about these non-degree pathways, there's so many questions that I have from the student side, but I'd like to hear from Maria about how you think employers will take to this data. How will they respond?
No, I think it's a great question. And before I answer it, I know Liz can't see the screen, so let you know that you can access the slides by clicking on the session resources in the app.
Okay.
So there's a public service announcement.
Thank you, Maria.
So I think it's a great question because in order for us to truly make change in kind of how we, right, as a nation really think about pathways beyond high school, it's going to take changes across the ecosystem, right, both on the supply side and the demand side, right? And at the end of the day, like in our homes, right, like I have a daughter going through the college process now, right? Parents have a huge amount to kind of like say and think about this too, so we won't even go there yet. But on the employer
Well, it could
side,
be cheaper. It could be a lot cheaper.
Exactly. So I think that what I really appreciated from the results, right, is that you see kind of willingness and eagerness on the part of the employers to be thinking about this differently. Now, a lot of that could be this moment of time that we're in, right, with an extremely tight labor market, right? So is this a moment there where we can kind of leverage this and really start to drive change? And I think we are starting to see that with more and more companies signaling that they're open to skills-based hiring. But I think there's a lot to unpack within
Yeah,
that.
the session before was filled with that. I don't know if any of you went to it. It was a great setup for this. But also, what about the risks for students, though? Is that a concern that you think we should be really worried about here?
I think we need to help students navigate, right? And I think that just doesn't happen right now. So I think better, more equitable, high-quality career navigation, right? Starting even in middle school, like ASA
Well,
does,
yeah, I
and
mean,
then
that's what I'm
through.
going to ask Jean to follow up on, but I know from years of reporting on this that there's the student guidance counselor ratio in the high school level is about 1 to 900 to 1,000, or 1 to 1,000, and the kind of counseling you really need when you're in high school at large public high schools, including the ones my kids attended, do not exist. So I know, Jean, that you believe at ASA that the best time to start is in middle school. How do we educate students to these various pathways early? What would that look like if we were going to do that better?
I think an awful lot of this has to do with making kids aware of what's out there. And it's not only making them aware of what's out there, but it's having them come to a realization about what they love to do, what they're good at, how could you see the intersection of those two things playing out in the myriad of opportunities that are out there. And kids right now simply don't know the options that are available to them. And so if we could start earlier, and I do believe middle school is the absolute appropriate time based on all the research we've done, we can start to be able to let kids see the pathways. And I would also say, before high school, because oftentimes kids are making decisions about courses that they're taking in high school, and oftentimes if they don't have a full array about what they might consider, they may not be taking the courses that they want to take in high school to be able to do that thing after high school. So I think that's incredibly important.
So we just started earlier at the school level.
Absolutely.
For sure.
I think it's a case of, and you made the good point, that not only do we have a shortage of guidance counselors, but we also have teachers who have days that are absolutely packed. You know, where do they put career exploration in this? And there are certainly some school districts who have turned their whole curriculum upside down to accommodate, but there are others who simply have not been able to make that leap. That's, I believe, where we can work together to do a beyond the classroom kind of exploration and experimentation and be able to have the best of both worlds.
Yeah, it seems like we're going to need other pathways as well because of the obsession with learning loss post-pandemic, which has
Exactly.
put even more pressure on teachers and principals who are leaving in droves,
Right.
and superintendents. There's jobs available everywhere in that, for educators. Roberto, the government, though, should have some role in this, so maybe you could tell us a little bit about what you see. I know there were a lot of plans in Build Back Better. We don't know exactly when or if they'll come to fruition, but how do you see the government's role in helping students on these pathways?
Sure, I think the government can play an important role in responding to the data here, and you know, so many great resonant themes that Rahul brought forward around this data. The openness and I think the excitement for so many young people around building skills and thinking about non-degree pathways. We have to respond to that. We have to better understand that. And we have to understand also I think some of the psychology that we're seeing here around risk and take the lessons around what does that mean in terms of how we design our systems to do better, to mitigate some of that risk for employers as well as for individuals, right? And so that's part of how we think about articulation agreements, how we think about opportunities for, you know, our non-degree pathways to connect up with degree granting credentials and pathways is also a really important part of that. And we're playing in this bigger backdrop around just how large the stakes are in the moment that we're in terms of the economy. And making, you know, we know that 7 out of 10 jobs require some amount of education and training beyond high school. So how are we placing a greater share of our young people on a path? And not just one path, but multiple paths to be able to succeed in that economy. And we need systems that are going to do a better job of that.
I would say some of those pathways have been really endangered since the pandemic, and one place where we're really seeing it is in community college enrollment declines. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what role they play, especially now that we have a kind of an advocate for community colleges in the White House, community college professor.
We have our community college professor and teacher-in-chief, Dr. Jill Biden, our First Lady, absolutely, who's a tremendous advocate for community colleges, who are one of our most important public institutions and engines for this skill building, and it's going to, you know, that's connecting up to the president's charge, as you mentioned, Liz, to provide free 2 years of community college for all individuals across the country, for our adults, for our students who are graduating and coming out of high school. We believe there's tremendous potential in that, as well as in growing the Pell Grant as an opportunity to provide more pathways that are affordable to degree credentials and to skills. And that's critical because we know that affordability crunch we've already talked about is something that's very real.
It's definitely there, and I know Maria wants to respond to this, but we also have to, whenever we talk about community colleges, I often have to bring up just how dismal their graduation rates are.
Right.
So if we're talking about viable pathways, and if you were to look at some of their graduation rates, that could be a game changer or a stopper.
And I think that is where it comes back to this redesign. How can we bring our higher education system, our community colleges, alongside our K-12 system, alongside our employers, and alongside our workforce system, and think about a more learner-centered and student-centered model for how to create pathways to gain those skills, gain those credentials. And we should be in a place where we're providing, you know, as a country, every young person in high school should be able to graduate with post-secondary credit and with work-based experience. That should just be something that we should be able to do as a country. We know the values of that, the merits of that for the future of those individuals.
Maria, what do you think about some of the ideas that Roberto's talking about?
Yeah, I think they're great. I would add a couple, so I think one piece that JFF is advocating for, and many groups in DC, is expanding, Pell eligibility to include high-quality short-term credentials. And so that's something that we feel is really important. Now we know that quality is the key word there, and so that's going to be one of our key areas of focus over the next couple of years. We just acquired a group called EQUOS a couple weeks ago to kind of bring some of that quality focus in-house to JFF. I think there's a great role for the federal government to play there too. And then I also think this is something that Roberto and I have talked about a lot over the years, is how to start to kind of connect the dots more effectively and strategically across some of the Department of Education initiatives and the Department of Labor initiatives, right? I think in the decades that I've been working on these issues, I think what used to be two very different worlds are now, because the world is changing, right? Education and workforce are becoming more and more intertwined, yet we administer those programs and those funding streams in very siloed ways, which I think drives kind of siloed behavior then, at the state and the local and the institutional level.
But this need for talent, all these job openings, and the great people quitting, which may or may not play into some of these things, but the idea that you can work from home, that there's so many more jobs available, probably open up a whole new set of questions about options and about when to start. Jean, they're talking about pathways that are built later on, but how do we build the kind of pathways that accomplish what you want, which is to really have the schools make it an absolute priority at a young age so students are aware of their different options and prepared for what happens next, to make these choices?
I think first and foremost, when schools take this on and they make a commitment to it, they do it brilliantly. And we've seen that in a number of partnerships that we have engaged in. The problem is that every school district, every state has different ways of implementing and different policies that we have to kind of work through. So to think that we're going to come up with a system of one size fits all is not going to work in this case. But I do believe that if there were a mandate about career-connected learning, about being able to expose young people to careers at a very early age, and to have it become part of the fabric, starting in the early grades through high school, that we could start to have more people become aware and more people embrace this.
When you say a mandate, is that something that you think that Roberto could have something to do with, that the federal government?
I absolutely believe that Roberto could do something about this. And happily, I should say, because we've spoken about this, that is absolutely within the realm of possibility. We sat in a session yesterday and listened to Scott Solberg talking about the CCDC report and about how China and India have so many more people on the planet than we do in the United States, and how we have about 80% of our workforce that really have not had some kind of post-secondary education. We're going to start falling further and further behind. So if we don't do something, and there isn't a mandate, I would say that we're going to put ourselves in question, and we're a world leader. We want to stay that way.
What do you think, Roberto?
I think we certainly need to prioritize change, and the imperative for change is huge right now. I think, we have to think about how we can disrupt some of the norms in the system, which we know are not serving all of our kids the way they need to, and we have to put equity at the center of that too. How are we making sure that our students from underserved communities are getting the greatest opportunity to be able to build those skills, to begin to plan their future, to begin to have that orientation early? We have, our status quo of this dual system, and really a false dichotomy of either going on to a post-secondary four-year college pathway, or going on to a pathway where you're building skills, but there's no articulation or connection to things that you can then take to the bank relative to later employment and degree granting. We have to begin to blend and build much more of a hybrid system there. And I think the points that Jean and Maria raised are really important, that we don't need a one-size-fits-all approach. I mean, there are places, and we were talking, the data brings this forth. If you look at, places like Michigan that have created early middle college high schools, places like Tennessee that are thinking about how to, in their community college system, how to grant degree and
The
grant
P-TECH
credit.
model is a good example
Right,
too.
the P-TECH model is another great example. And a lot of these places are doing what Maria's describing in terms of saying, how do we bring that workforce sector alongside that education sector, alongside employers in a bigger way? We have to model that at the federal level, and we have to learn from state examples of how that's working well
career
for
technical
students.
education that combines pathways to degrees. I saw that recently during a reporting trip in Indiana. Can be very, very effective as well. But that equity piece that you were talking about really struck me, because when I was recently looking at the statistics on who is leaving college and who is not going, they're losing men and minorities far and beyond any other groups. Black and Latino men particularly. I'd love to ask all of you to talk a little bit about what's promising in terms of helping to cope with the equity picture and the loss of these populations in terms of getting any kind of a degree.
I think that I feel that for too long, a lot of the barriers to progress have been out of good right concern about equity, but I actually think we need to think about it the other way, that we are never going to truly attain racial equity unless we can break down some of these traditional system barriers and perceptions, right? So I think we actually need to start to kind of flip the mental model and to really think about what would it mean to truly build high quality, equitable pathways beyond high school for all students. And a little short history lesson, back in the Clinton administration, there was the School to Work Opportunities Initiative, which I worked on, and people younger than me might have read about it somewhere. But the whole reason that failed, really, was because it was seen as a tracking initiative. At the end of the day, it was really meant to do exactly what Roberto said, to bring career-connected education to all students in the country. And instead, there was a big backlash around it. So I think, as we think about messaging moving forward, really putting equity and learners at the center of these models and pushing both the supply and demand side from there, I think is where we'll make progress. But I think without that, we get caught in a vicious catch-22 cycle of argument, particularly in the DC policy world, around quality and equity without actual any forward momentum into improvement.
So Jean, do you think that means that we have to think about things like, I hate these words that are being thrown around, but upskilling and micro-credentials and new reskilling and all the different words that are being used for creating different pathways. Do we need to convince parents at an early age that these kinds of options are just as attractive and prestigious because they actually lead to jobs and maybe not huge amounts of student debt?
I think that, to go back just a minute when you were talking about the equity issue, I think it's critically important now as we try to work on policy and we try to come together working with school systems, et cetera, that we have to find a way to have a mechanism to help kids now. I'm concerned about the kids right now.
Right.
And so the things that we are doing in the beyond the classroom space, meeting kids where they are, and the mobile devices, in the places that they are, YouTube, Snapchat, TikTok, those places, that allows students to have exposure to options, careers, et cetera, is a really good way to equalize. And as school districts try and do this, state by state by state, that just takes time. No matter what kind of federal edict that may come out, that's going to take time. But in the meantime, we have this way beyond the classroom of approaching kids. We have young people from 50 states, all 50 states participating, all races, all ethnicities, so that we feel as though at least that's a start. And so as we work with school systems to all come along together, that's an opportunity to make some headway. As far as parents are concerned, and I think this came out in the research as well, kids are really afraid of the stigma that may come along with a non-traditional pathway. We did research early on with parents and students about what they would think about non-traditional pathways. Our parents, almost 100% said that they would consider a non-traditional pathway for their son or daughter, but the same parents said, 60% of them said, they would feel as though they had failed their son or daughter if they didn't go to college.
Wow.
So you have this, kind of split in this dichotomy. So we've got to work with parents to educate them as we work with young people to see,
Don't you
have them
think
see
the
what
rising
options are.
college tuition cost is going to be a real something in your favor in that education?
Something's got to give, for sure. Something has got to give, without a question, as far as college costs. Yes.
Roberta, I'd like you to speak to that a little bit, but given the partisan gridlock in D.C., I'm wondering how you feel we might have any sort of policy direction or relief from some of these issues and solutions that these folks are talking about.
Sure. Well, I think this is the area. I mean, I really think this is an area where if you sit down with policymakers at the state level, economic leaders, our business leaders, this is an area where we have the opportunity to build bipartisanship and to build solutions that are really about the future of the economy and about individual opportunity. And when I think about equity, I don't think about every individual gets the exact same thing. You think about equitable opportunity. How are we providing the chance for these pathways for this career preparedness to live alongside, and I go back to that being live alongside pathways to be able to earn credentials, to earn degrees that are going to really pay off in the long term in terms of economic mobility and success for our communities. So, it really is about providing those pathways for everyone, right? And going back to why can't we have a system where we're providing those pathways, not that false dichotomy, but those pathways for all, and providing the chance for building those career-ready skills that we know employers need. They articulate all the time what they need, right? We just have not provided an environment where we're building that orientation and building that readiness earlier. And then the other thing I'll just say is, when we think about parents and students and families, when we worked on the college scorecard and the first iterations of the college scorecard about 10 years ago, which Secretary Cardona just updated recently, just a few weeks ago, talked about this. We sat down and looked at the resources that families have around how they plan for their future. And you think about these big ticket purchases like a house, you'd have specs, you'd be able to look at specs, compare attributes, compare outcomes from institution to institution. We didn't have that in the higher education space, and that was a driving force for the college scorecard. Why can't we think about that type of data tool for our young people and families today when it comes to employment, when it comes to the workplace, when it comes to pathways and opportunities to earn skills and move through degrees and be able to then move forward there. So I think part of the solution here is really helping address some of the risks that Rahul talked to us about by creating more information, greater clarity for our families.
That's great. And we actually have a question for Rahul, so you'll have a chance to speak as well. Somebody would like you to share the demographics information of the Gen Z students who participated in your study. Do you know what % were underrepresented minorities or low-income first-gen students?
Sure. So these were 1,500 respondents from across the United States, and our methodology accounts for all the representativeness of the population. So we do weight the sample. So it will pretty much representative of the underrepresented population in the demographics of the US. When we will break out this data in the full report, so you will be able to see how these responses are by Black, Latino, white population, by high school grade, and also by gender. So you will be able to see all those crosstabs and break out with the report.
Okay, that's great. I'm going to let Jean, you tackle this one. I love this question. Parents and students at my school are concerned about missing out on social engagement with peers if they go straight into the workplace. Thoughts?
I think that is a genuine concern. I think we are really focusing on efforts on some kind of post-secondary training after high school. I mean, there are a lot of kids who take an opportunity right out of high school to take a gap year. Some travel, some work, et cetera. And I would say within those communities, there's an opportunity to interact, connect, et cetera. But it is certainly not the same thing as some kind of a post-secondary experience. And I would say, from my own background, I worked in higher ed most of my career. Kids not only learn about things that they could potentially do as a career while they're in college, but they make friends for life. They oftentimes meet their significant other. They learn how to network. They learn an awful lot of very critical skills. There is an opportunity to do that in these other post-secondary pathways. We just have to make sure that they're resident. And to make Roberto's point, we need to be able to have an accreditation system or a watchdog effect, I would say, of what post-secondary pathways could be and how you get there.
Yeah,
for that.
we have to make them a lot more attractive.
Right.
Please, Maria.
I also think there is an opportunity to rethink how we can recreate kind of that experience.
Yeah.
So for example, if we thought about the online degrees at Southern New Hampshire, Western Governors, what if you kind of created, communities, right? Like kind of like manufactured communities where young people can go
Study
and
groups.
work and learn,
Right.
Because my husband actually just got his degree at Southern New Hampshire, so my daughter was like, oh, that's like interesting, but I don't want to like get my degree in our kitchen, but if you kind of could create something around that experience, similarly, some of the kind of non-traditional providers like SV Academy or Climb Higher, they're creating kind of that cohort-based learning approach, which I think is great.
I've seen
as
that
well.
at community colleges too. The learning communities, I think they used to call them. Yeah, something that gives the students a feeling of togetherness and that social fabric that really makes a difference. I want to throw it back in the federal government's court again with a question about free two-year colleges and growing Pell Grants. Okay, where do you stand on the policy priority of free college? Is it still alive, possibly? And the role of employers in affording non-college pathways.
Absolutely. It continues to be a high priority for our administration, and I think if we look around the country, we're really excited to see such great momentum and energy in local communities and cities and at the state level to provide these guarantees around free community college, around greater college pathways. It sends a strong message to young people and to adults who are looking to upskill and reskill that there is a place, there is an avenue for them, and that the affordability, which we know is just such a challenge with respect to and is shaping the life outcomes of a new generation, honestly, in terms of their life choices coming out of school. It sends an important message around the post-secondary opportunity for all. So it's something that we are very dedicated to continuing to pursue as an administration. And I will say, I think those combined with wonderful work-based experiences, what Maria was mentioning around, how we think about opportunities for young people to be together and to be in workplace settings where they're building those collaborative communication, critical thinking skills, those skills that we know are really critical to employers and to future employability, that we have to create greater opportunities for those skills in our K-12 system, actually before our young people leave high school, and continue those through community college and through other avenues.
Great. This is a question for anyone who knows of some statewide policies. Is there anyone aware of states that might be approaching the information gap challenge at the systems level, for example, tech, data, and/or policy?
I think some of the states who are part of the Data for the American Dream initiative that Schmidt Futures funded, so Colorado and New Jersey come to mind.
Jean, any
I mean, I've been particularly impressed in the role that Massachusetts is playing in pathways programs. Governor Baker really was making it part of his legacy to kind of revamp how students understand careers, but moreover, how they have opportunity for work-based learning while they're in high school. And that has really been integrated into the school systems in Massachusetts. I think with COVID, that kind of diminished the impact that it had because we were adding 20 high schools at a time. but still in all, it is changing the culture and it is changing the thinking about how that can happen. So I also think programs like that are incredibly important.
And it can take years.
It can, but again,
Another
really
great
good
question
results.
too, this is about the disconnect that we're seeing. Many employers seem open to rethinking minimum education requirements, but not work experience. So, and those requirements, how do we handle that disconnect? Anyone have thoughts on that?
Interesting. I think that's where the expansion of models like registered apprenticeship can come into play, right, where you can be gaining kind of the education and the work experience at the same time. I also think that even when employers, and I'll even put JFF in this category, when we are removing our degree requirements from our job descriptions, we're finding that our actual hiring practice hasn't changed that much, right? So it has to go beyond kind of the change in policy and move towards the change in practice. And I think we need to do more to help employers do that. And that's why I was encouraged in the President's State of the Union address last week. He spoke to the support that the federal government can provide to employers through R&D kind of around skills-based hiring and kind of promotion of models. Because again, it's easy to like talk about it. It's like less easy to get started.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we need greater incentives around apprenticeships and those opportunities around skill-based hiring. I think Maria's absolutely right. And we also need our higher education system to start to innovate and create other opportunities to provide credit for prior work-based learning and for other opportunities around, competency-based education. So
That's also a very long, slow process. It was a topic of the discussion at the last session as well. There's an impatience with this unwillingness to be a little bit more flexible about prior work experience and prior credits, transferable credits. These have been log jams for years.
yes, all of these require a new mindset that's really matched to the innovation economy and to the moment that we're in relative to the labor market. If we're going to begin to set the table from a policy perspective with some new systems.
That's, again, one of those things that takes a long time. I imagine that you're hoping your research might speed some of this up.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely the initial stage of building a baseline for potential future research, and we are generating a lot of ideas and thoughts through this conference, but also through this survey which we have done. So there are gaps which need to be fulfilled. How they will be fulfilled would require a lot of partnerships and conversations, which ASA, JFF, and many players who are in this conference are showcasing that there is an intention and the need for that. And I think we want to bridge, like we were talking prior to the session, in that triangle, the policy, practice, and the research part to make sure that we achieve the best outcomes. And that's the direction we want to potentially move toward.
Did you want to add to that, Jean?
I'd say, this research is the first step. We have many facets of this partnership that we're working on so that we will be going deeper after the report is issued, and then we'll be talking about landscape studies to see who might be able to be interested in this with us and be able to move this forward, whether it be employers, other systems, et cetera, partners, to really start to bring this out on a national basis.
There does seem to be a real tension between traditional higher ed and all of these new innovations. You guys were throwing around a lot of things that not everybody may have heard of here, like Western Governors in Southern New Hampshire, and the last conference I went to, ASU, GSV, there was so much talk about throwing out some of the traditions in higher ed and pushing all of the new innovations and need for more of a willingness in it. And there were some real examples, though, of how even traditional places like HBCUs are changing by making their offerings online and so that older students can come back. I'd just love to hear how you see the tension between holding on to traditions and welcoming some of the new innovations and entrepreneurship in a way that will most benefit students.
Yes, I would say at JFF, we very much think about it as a dual transformation process. So it's important to help the traditional long-standing systems continue to innovate and, as Roberto said, kind of reimagine how they do business. But at the same time, I think it's equally important to support the disruptors and the innovators who are working from outside the system, right? So you need that inside game and an outside game at the same time. But to me, there's also a lot of like promise and energy around bringing the two together, right? So some work that we're doing with Google and Verizon is really about embedding some of these newer approaches in the traditional systems, whether that be the Google IT certificate or Verizon's work with Generation USA, and how can you kind of create partnerships that bring the best of both worlds that help students
So there's not an
advance.
either or.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Jean, Roberto, would you add to that? Well, in our remaining time?
I would say that, and I think I speak for, whether it's faculty on a college campus or faculty within school systems in K through 12, we are all doing this work because we care about young people. We all are trying to put our best foot forward to giving young people the best opportunity we possibly can. So I don't foresee, I think this is about education. I think it's about, the transparency and talking to each other about how we can move this forward together. And I think if we do that and keep our eye on the prize, which is our young people today, that we can move this. I really do believe that.
And Roberto, several questions are pressing you once again to articulate the federal role and tell us when and how it's going to happen.
Absolutely. How is
It
this
should
all
happen
going to get?
now.
How is this all going to get solved?
Not to put you on.
It is, well, I think, we have some really important investments in front of us in terms of increasing and strengthening the Pell Grant, and also providing opportunities for greater innovation and expansion of Pell, as Maria mentioned. We have opportunities to think about supporting our community college system as an important engine to innovate and to harness some of this openness for new ideas and a focus on student-centeredness and on equity at the core. And you heard President Biden talk about and acknowledge the importance of our community colleges the other night in the State of the Union. And we have other wonderful proposals to do more to expand our career and technical education system. And we have to make good on the promise as well to think about how we're redesigning and re-envisioning our high schools in this context. And starting earlier, we have to start this conversation much earlier with our young people. So we are going to continue to press those budget proposals forward and those proposals that the President's put forth with Congress. We believe there's opportunity there. But it's not just a federal approach. This is about how we support our states and our local communities to move this conversation forward. And just as you said, Liz, I think if you look at the evolution of this conversation around higher ed, 10, 15 years ago, there was a small minority of thinkers and institutions and leaders who were thinking about innovation. We're starting to see this openness around innovation and student-centeredness take hold and take root across our system. And I think when you mix that up with the demand that parents and young people have for a clearer, less murky pathway to gain the skills that they need for their future, I am really optimistic about what's ahead.
Well, you hear no disagreement from Jean. She just wants you to make sure that they start in middle school. That's really
I agree.
important.
The earlier the better.
Maria, what do you want Roberta to go back and tell folks in Washington to do?
I would say definitely expand Pell to short-term credentials. Use the federal lever to really push on the quality conversation. I think build upon some of the innovations like the reforms in the college scorecard, and how to make that more actionable to young people and their parents, because I think there's a user disconnect there. And really see how to leverage across the agencies, the billions of dollars that are going to be flowing through commerce over the next couple of months, and really kind of see how to drive some of these pathways conversations through some of the other agencies too.
And I know there are some parents of recent college graduates, I'm not talking about anyone in particular, who would like you to who would like the further push on eliminating student loan debt. I imagine that would be somewhere on the agenda.
That is an important part of the agenda, and really proud through this pandemic to be able to support borrower relief, but doing much more in that space as well.
Well, one that when you look at it makes you think, why didn't I know about some of these other pathways many
Right.
years ago?
Right.
Because as you said, Jean, something has to give when people are seeing some of the four-year schools, including ones that you used to help run, are having tuition annual upwards of $83,000 a year,
Yep.
which is a really big number. That includes
really big
everything,
number.
obviously, but it's a lot. So we have a lot to work with, and I think we are close to running out of time here, but I want to reiterate that people can come tomorrow to the Hilton, room 42. Did I say that right? 412. For more questions, and you can download the data again, and some of these folks will be around afterwards to chat a little bit about their findings. So it's really been a pleasure hearing from this panel, and hopefully we'll continue to be able to ask some questions and keep the conversation going long after South by Southwest. Thanks again.
Thank you.